As we hear it read from the pew, our gospel passage for this weekend begins with chapter 8, verse 1 of John's Gospel, which simply reads, Jesus went to the Mount of Olives. The beginning of verse 2 causes some confusion, reading, But early in the morning he arrived again in the temple area. The question becomes, why the quick back and forth? 1 second, Jesus is on the Mount of Olives, and the next, he is in the temple. The issue is that the passage actually begins with chapter 7, verse 53, which serves as a transition verse between the preceding episode and this one in the narrative. In the preceding episode, Jesus is teaching in the temple area during the Feast of Tabernacles. His teaching and popularity draw ire from the religious elite and wonder from members of the general public, who begin to question if Jesus might be the Messiah. The chief priests and the Pharisees send guards to arrest Jesus, but upon hearing Jesus speak, the guards are apparently moved by the power of his teaching, and they too begin to wonder whether he might be the Messiah, as some people in the crowd suggest. This leads to an argument between the temple guards, the chief priests, and the Pharisees. The Pharisees dismiss the idea that Jesus is the Messiah as absurd, with the sole exception of Nicodemus. It is this group who disperses in verse 53, each going to his own house, while Jesus, we are told in chapter 8, verse 1, goes to the Mount of Olives, apparently to spend the night there. It is this very dynamic which leads some to believe that the passage we hear today belongs at the end of chapter 21 of the Gospel of Luke. There, in verses 37 and 38, Luke tells us, During the day, Jesus was teaching in the temple area, but at night he would leave and stay at the place called the Mount of Olives. And all the people would get up early each morning to listen to him in the temple area. The following chapter, 22, in Luke's Gospel, begins the Passion narrative with a deal made between the religious authorities and Judas to hand over Jesus to be put to death. The possibility of an original Lucan setting of this passage is instructive. As discussed on the second Sunday of Lent, it is common for Jesus to spend the night in prayer upon a mountain in Luke's Gospel. Thus, the dynamic we hear of at the beginning of today's passage is telling us that Jesus retires to the Mount of Olives to pray and rest each night, and then returns to the temple to teach in the morning, as we hear in verses 1 to 2 of chapter 8. Jesus went to the Mount of Olives, but early in the morning he arrived again in the temple area, and all the people started coming to him, and he sat down and taught them. These two verses present us with three important details that are important for how we read the passage of the woman caught in adultery. First, by going back and forth between prayer and teaching the people, we see that Jesus is in fact sharing his intimacy that he shares with the Father with the masses. Moreover, his movement down the Mount of Olives to do this speaks of his incarnation. It is precisely by deigning to become one with us in all things but sin, and assuming a human nature, that the incarnate Son of God, Jesus Christ, brings the triune relationship down to earth, if you will, to share it with the human family. In part, Jesus communicates this relationship and how we are to live so as to be integrated into it through his teaching. As the incarnate Word of God, Jesus' teaching on this score is authoritative and definitive. This is the second detail to note here, which is symbolized by the fact that we are told that Jesus sat down to teach the people. In the ancient Jewish tradition, sitting while teaching symbolized the authority of the teacher. Jesus now sits to teach the people how they are to live in communion with God in the very place they encountered God most intimately, the temple. The specific mountain Jesus daily descends from to teach provides us with a third and final important detail here. Jesus is spending the night on the Mount of Olives. Of course, when we think of olives, we think of olive oil. This alone is important, because in Jesus' time and place, oil was used not only for cooking, but also for healing, specifically healing wounds. This signifies that by his daily teaching, Jesus is bringing the people healing. Now, in the episode about to transpire, Jesus will demonstrate what is at the very core of his teaching. And once again, the symbol of oil is instructive in the sense that it tells us what to look for. The Greek word for oil, eleon, shares the same root as the Greek word for mercy, eleos. Together, Jesus' descent from the Mount of Olives and oil symbolize the core of Jesus' saving message and mission. The eternal Son of God has descended from heaven to become incarnate precisely to bring us divine mercy. Divine mercy, then, can function as a hermeneutic, a rule of thumb, for understanding the episode of the woman caught in adultery.